So a little bit about our speaker today. idtalks will be brought to you, shared with you, idtalks class together with Falko Blumenthal. He was born and raised in Germany, and he has been also studying abroad in USA and Latvia, which has shaped him as a person, as a professional. And after his studies in political science, economics, and urban studies in Munich, Hamburg, and Helsinki, he continued his studies at a master professional in vocational training at the Chamber of Commerce in Bonn. Falko has a further background in organizational development, non-formal education and counseling for the trade unions and movements at local, national, and international level in the international movement of nature friends. Yes, he has a very close interaction of political theory with the daily struggles of urban and work life spaces. So please welcome Falko. I'm sure that you can present yourself much better than I did. Again, yeah, idtalks class and our speaker, Falko Blumenthal.
Thank you so much for your warm and charitable presentation of me and my weird CV. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for the privilege to talk to you from all different kind of places. I heard not only Belgium, but Istanbul and other places are here as well. That's a great opportunity to get into exchange with all of you. I'm sharing my screen, at least I hope I do. My topic I was invited to do is class. While a class originally in the old Latin meant a group of ships, nowadays we understood it as a group of people, at least in our area of youth work, social work, education, and beyond. We live in a liberal society, in a liberal ideology, where we talk about that equal prospects and equal achievement for everybody is the goal of education, of public, social, cultural interaction, and that the expectations of those with the same abilities and aspirations should not be affected by their social class. As an example of the area where we are active or interested might be one of the biggest programs we have, the biggest areas where public money is thrown into the world with the hope to make the world a little bit better. Erasmus is supposed to support the European Pillar of Social Rights, is supposed to implement the youth strategy and to develop the European dimension in sport. Actually, I've never been to a sports Erasmus activity, but I heard they're awesome. So here again, the social inclusion is very prominent in the very short description with the most expensive or most prominent words in the description of this very politically named and described Erasmus Plus program. As we all come from a background in social and educational work, we would expect that Erasmus as pan-European program even transcending the borders of the European Union, would fulfill these promises. In a paper from 2008, Suto Otero found out that most people active in Erasmus Plus consider themselves from an average income family, 31 even higher than average, and 6% considerably higher than average. If we would think of ourselves as maybe a Finnish society, this would be no problem because everybody is kind of middle class, kind of lives in the same realities, and some people drive a Volvo and other drive a Mercedes-Benz, but we are still people. Unfortunately, in the neoliberal regime of the last 30 years, this is not the reality. The Eurostat, so the statistical office of the European Union, has to concede that on average 21% of the population is at risk of poverty and of social exclusion. That means that 20% of the people we engage with on average while traveling Europe or working with Europe do not have the means of going to a theater, participating in the education they want to, and are absolutely excluded from the higher levels of what our societies have to offer. There are, of course, countries which are more inclusive, or countries with more average, close to the mean of society. Czechia and Slovenia are not the richest countries in Europe, but they seem to be the most equal countries. And on the other side of this slide, there are the newer members of EU with Bulgaria and Romania, and of course Greece, one of the countries hit hardest by the regime of the Troika of the last economic crisis. So exclusion from Erasmus Plus programs as one of the examples of where we reach with social and youth work, the youth of Europe in general, means that we reach the upper half of society. This is not new. You don't need Falko to tell you that. Social Erasmus and other attempts are being made to address a form of inclusion, try to reach out and to include the communities people live in. They try to encourage students to be active participants in their exchange by volunteering, by engaging with host communities, and many other attempts to have these poor people, these excluded people, these people from the not so good schools, somehow involved and thrown into maybe our world of grant proposals, of dissemination activities, of youth conferences, of eco-village visits. So I feel comfortable in holding this talk and taking your time based on this, and I say that class matters and that the actors of social work, youth work, and social policy and youth policy agree that class, that the social groups we are divided in our societies and European capitalism matter and should be addressed when we think about designing activities, designing our approach to youth work and social work in general. Here I pulled from a random sociology paper, which I will not source right now, a form of social stratification. Why? Because most times when we talk about class, we mean social stratification, like this person has money, the other person has less money. They try to combine this with the so-called Maslow's pyramid, where there's a theory that you need your basic physical needs met in order to take care of your social needs. And if and when your social needs are somehow addressed, then you can talk about your self-esteem, your identity, you talk about your self-actualization, and go into politics, the arts, philosophy, in your group of friends where you talk about abstract concepts of beauty or space exploration. From the perspective of us, and I mean that in a very broad sense of us as educators, maybe in the most broadest range. I don't want to exclude you if you're not a teacher, youth worker yourself. This presents a problem. As we, with these lines we see on the slide, we create anthropological groups. We create groups of very rich people whose second daughter is sent to art school, and she's allowed to become the person she is. While when you're coming from a poor family from Bulgaria or even some post-industrial areas of Germany, people should be glad that they get some state social security money, that they have food, but there is nothing to talk about arts or ecological education or development of social needs or exchanges in order to develop your social networks or social abilities, because you're just in this group and you're defined by your economic, financial, social stratification, what kind of person you are, what kind of engagement can reach you, and from this kind of anthropology, there evolves a certain kind of paternalistic social policy where poor people get money and food, where middle-class people get Erasmus programs and access to universities, and rich people get access to the cultural habitus and to the private education that explains to you why the stuff hanging in the Louvre is important or not. So for us, from an educational perspective, this basic 80s, 90s sociology doesn't help us to develop courses of action or courses of thought, how to learn, how to deal with stratification of society when we try to transcend stratification of what we work with and who we work with. If you don't get along with the big system, maybe one idea is to go back to the individual, to the actual person. So when we look at the single human being living somewhere in one of our European societies, we can see in what kind of relations this person is to other persons and to the rest of the world. Here I found a graphical representation. Maybe it looks a little bit like summoning a demon, but actually this is just a graph of the neo-Marxist theory of David Harvey from Great Britain, originally a geographer who nowadays talks about economics in a way I don't understand anymore, but from his late geographical period, this is from the early 90s, where I still understood what he was saying, and I'm trying to relate that the actual human being is in a net where the reproduction of daily life plays a role, from brushing your teeth, of finding food, of finding shelter, of finding friends to talk to, is on the other hand dependent on the kind of technology we use or don't use, and are maybe unable to use a typewriter, but are great with GitHub and C++ programming. We have a relation to nature as a person, as a group of persons needing fossil energy at the moment, and hopefully using solar and wind energy in the future. We are in a net of social relations that is not only my friends or my loud neighbor who is brushing his teeth way too noisily, but is the relationship I have with my employer as well. The kind of behavior I'm allowed to take towards him while still retaining my ability to pay my bills and keeping my job. And in these social relationships, this relation to technology drives towards the modes of production we have in a capitalist society where we have this differentiation between the value of the thing we produce, which we can use as a thing to look at or a thing to drink out of, on the one hand, on the other hand, as something which can be sold for $2.99 on the market and goes down as soon there is a USB-C powered cup, or goes up in case of sand and ceramic becoming way more expensive on the world market. And all this comes together to our personal mental conception of the world, dependent on the relationships we have to the rest of the world. And I think if we go to an idea of human groups of humans developed from clustering experiences of actual human beings, and not a stratification we look from a eagle's point of view, maybe we have rather a chance to see which line on this picture we can twin as an educator and go to the mental conceptions, or to develop the relation to nature, or talk about and reflect about the reproduction of our daily life, whether we need this new every year or not. So if you want to follow me on this individualistic train of thought, how we reach to a concept like class, one could derive at some thesis, some ideas we could put out to the world, that the working class, which we derive not from an anthropological point of view, but from a more phenomenological perspective, lives through a mediated and instrumental relationship to society and the environment. People are used to, I obey the teacher, I get the grades. I obey the boss, I get a bit of money. I do what my other friends are doing, and I agree with them, and I get some social and personal and ethical recognition. Second, the working class fluctuates between a capitalist mindset of exchange values and at the same time of trust values. When in my mental conception, I'm trained to the reality, everything costs money, everything costs my time and my work time. If there is something new, I ask of it, what do I get from that? Or what does it cost to me? I'm trained every day that most of the things I cannot have. And for the little stuff I have to do something. So if somebody offers me a place as a participant in a training, I ask, what's the cost? What's the gain? At the same time, from a working class perspective, if we follow these demonic multi-pentagram of David Harvey, we try to find our groups where we interact based on trust values. For some societies, that's still the family or the church group or the village, where we don't ask how much money is the plate of food, but you give me food, I give you food, and we are one group. Or it's the friends, or it's the political party, or the trade union, depending on the society and its historical point. Third, and this is now out of the lines of Harvey, but my feeling that the working class developed from a collectivized form of production, of acting in the huge factory, on the huge fields in agriculture, from the mass cities, at least in the tiny, cute little European context, to a standardized form of production and reproduction. A care worker in a hospital doesn't have 15,000 co-workers, but maybe only 200. A delivery rider knows the names of 5 or 10 or 20 of his co-workers or her co-workers, but still what they do riding the bike from the restaurant to the customer is a standardized form of action, of behavior. The same when we try to recreate ourselves, the ways we watch Netflix, the ways we interact with others is highly standardized in the Western sphere. And the Western sphere extends now way into the CEE region and beyond. But of course, this can be debated. This is just an assumption I derived from my studies, research, and my personal experience. If you follow me and at least hold the thesis I put now here in the air as a maybe, we arrive in a time 100 years ago when Antonio Gramsci, who was an Italian journalist, a university dropout, autodidact, and political activist and functionary with the Communist Party, when he was put into prison by the Mussolini fascist regime, he was able to fill out a lot of school notebooks, which were published as the prison notebooks, where he thought about the mental, interactional, social capabilities of people. So basically, this is what we as social workers, youth workers, educators, or thinkers about education try to address. He follows these thoughts of lines in the web of where the human being is emboldened and is not trying to build an anthropological or economical stratification, where he says that using the word intellectual, not in the sense of old professor with a lot of books, but as the one who is able to reflect, the one who is able to interact with others and to create systems of interactions of others. So for some of our contexts, we could translate it as the one who facilitates a group building exercise and gives an input and brings people together so that they can open up into a new topic or a new way of working or thinking. That any social class develops their own intellectuals, and that how they work and how they work together works in specific conditions and in specific social relations. Based on this thought of that we cannot do paternalistically something for others, for an anthropologically speaking different group, that we cannot have a white saviors complex and we can't have a middle class saviors complex trying to mold poor people or formerly uneducated people into something that looks middle class in order for them to become like us. We have to accept them in their own terms, and as educators, as in Paulo Freire's term, try to be somebody going along the way together with them so that they find their own specific conditions and specific social relations in which they can turn into organic intellectuals or activate the intellectual capacity which they have as a human being. From that, I derive from the original thesis over the reflection on meditation on Antonio Gramsci to some thesis on youth work and social work with the working class, that the activities have to address the instrumental and the intrinsic relations to others and the world. Here in the background, I have a photo of the Youth Workers Board of Continental, which is a car tire company, basically, where they combine their demand for I want more money with a demand for, with the money in this society, you formulate respect and recognition. So with the formulation of politics of recognition, of coming together as a group, as a human beings, they demand money in order for the boss and for the rest of the company as where they are as young workers, of course, less paid than the older workers, that we have to talk about what the young people mean for the company with a lot of old people. Second, activities, as well as calls for participations, as well as the kind of dissemination, activation, and transfer activities and ideas we have to be anchored in the social relations the people already have. When we think back of the alliance about the exchange value based and trust value based interactions they have, you need to access the trust based relations and cannot ask a person who has never ever been flown in a plane or never ever was informed by a teacher or by a boss that you are here and it's valuable that you're here, but on the opposite, that you're here is based on me not giving you the bad grade you deserve, or taking away your job with which you would deserve, you little worker. So we have to access the groups, the relations, the committees, the families of the people we want to work for and with. And on the last addressee of this activity, following from my point two, is the collective or the structure in which action already has been perceived. So the area where if I do something, I get a reaction, where action and reaction is already established. As in the mediated media society, I'm a consumer of my own life. I can choose between Netflix and Amazon Prime. I can choose between becoming a carpenter or a telephone sales guy, but everywhere I'm living down a programmed path. Only in cases where I get mad at the world and I smash this glass, I see a reaction to my action. And so we have to find the areas and the places where our working class colleagues already experienced that if they do something, the world, or at least one other person, reacted already, so that they experience the activity, the youth work, the social work as an extension of the area where they feel as actors, as people whose presence and who's doing something matters. If I talk on this very theoretical level or this very personal experience level, I always like to do some plausibility checks. One check is a group I got to know from Macedonia, nowadays Northern Macedonia, which is a group of young people from a poorer city where they come together into low threshold youth work together and renovate things or just do sports together. And by some accident, they managed to link up to two different international European networks where you have the reality that really poor kids, like really 16, 17-year-olds doing sports in the community center and no outlook for an academic job or anything, are suddenly in Riga or in Prague and engage with the normal Erasmus crowd. Still, this SPPMD has some paternalistic areas where it's a state institution designed for people not to get into trouble, for not to become criminals. So it's not a self-organization, but still they prove to us that working class engagement on a youth work, on an Erasmus level, on a Salto level is doable and already happens. Another level is here, another more paternalistic example, a foundation which helps for vocational apprentices, like actual carpenters, cleaners, seamstresses, to get international experience, where they train people a little bit in English language, a little bit in self-confidence and a bit in legal stuff, or help them with the legal stuff, and throw them out in the world where they work in smaller groups, and get abroad and get the experience which is more normal for the upper classes. My last example, which is, in my opinion, the least paternalistic example, is here the international program of the Construction Workers Union of Germany, the BAU, financed by some old 1950s kind of money from the agricultural workers trust and pension funds, where they help Azubis, that means vocational trainees, to get into another country where they actively do not speak the language, and on the level of working together and working on the field or working on construction site together, develop the confidence and the ability to get beyond their own safe space and experience even foreign spaces as safe spaces. One of my colleagues went there to Estonia as a German. She speaks German and Bavarian. No Estonian, no Finnish, not really English, no French, where she helped out with a construction and a park planning company, where she experienced that work where you just show, do this and do that, take the shovel to that place, and I show you how we do this little wall and how we build the staircase, and I show you 2 steps, and then you can follow up with the rest of the steps. When she came back, she was transformed in some ways. She started to join a political party. She started learning languages through a buddy she got to know in Estonia, and now she's disseminating this cute little tiny international program of IGBAU further, where people are left in their own reality of work and not talk, which is the reality for half of population of Europe. And through this accepting youth work, they get beyond the language border, beyond the border of organizing, getting to know people, networking people as a very, very, very middle class and upper class skill. If there here now are 1 or 2 ideas of mine which are not completely wrong in your contexts, I'd like to give you one of the most important symbols to me, which is the hands of people bringing together. Of course, Nature Friends is just one of the contexts I had the privilege being combined with. All your other contexts are equally valid and maybe even more bigger and important, but keep with the hands as a symbol to go from that you call and mail the concrete partners embedded in the working class, in the agricultural class or unemployed class you want to address, or you feel that they could be an important part of the work, of the activities you're planning. And just as a few ideas, this can be the urban youth center in some random town in Liverpool. This can be a vocational school in Austria. This can be a mosque in Helsinki. This can be a social worker you hit up on LinkedIn, or this can be a town council in Porto, in Portugal, or some other sort of temple, political group, social group, religious group, or just a community center in a working class neighborhood. In my experience, when I do experiments with that, this needs 4 Zooms or more to convince the head teacher to let me talk to her group of protected people. But in my experience, at the same time, every social worker, every teacher, every elected head of a self-organized youth group is actually happy that you address him in his role, in his situation. And if you can offer him an idea, a feasible activity where his or her guys, her group can come and does not experience class warfare by the means of your English is so bad, by your clothes are not expensive enough, and you're weird, you're always sitting in the corner and you don't talk to the other kids. But if you manage to formulate an idea where communal activity, whether it's manual work or traveling together or experience a skill new to all of the participants, I had the experience that with that, you have in my opinion, politically more useful activity and kind of youth work and social work. And at the same time, you leave with one or two of your 15 participants the spark that another thing is possible, another kind of action and kind of interaction with the world is valuable. And with that, you could help for the working class of Europe to reorganize and regain their place they have in our society. For now, I say Dankeschön.
Well, I definitely can answer Bitteschön. This is my only German knowledge so far. Thank you so much, Falko. Indeed, this is really a big topic, 4 Zooms, more Zooms, and a lot of exchanges required. But since today we are not as many, and we could actually stay in this one room and continue the discussion, we maybe break a little bit of this ID Talk standard rules. Why not? You know, rules are there to be broken once in a while, if you agree. And I want to maybe throw in a provocation, a question that might steer a little bit the discussion. And to our participants here online, let's get a little bit more active in the chat, give your comments and questions, and we will not break out into smaller rooms, but we will stay in this one room and continue our discussion as a bigger group. So my question is, I don't hardly ever hear the word class at all, neither in project descriptions nor in daily conversations. This doesn't mean, right, that we don't have these inequalities that we used to have before. So what is this global fear of not using the word, and what do you think is behind it maybe?
You want to live in the UK?
Yeah, so Falko, I would love to hear you, and then we can also take some questions from our participants. We can switch to gallery view to see each other maybe at some point. And yeah, if you want to say something, just use the reactions in the bottom of the screen to ask for a role in the conversation.
You wanted to provoke, so I take the provocation and try to give the most provocative and arrogant answer first. You never use the word that describes the world if it's a normality. The word Europe was start being used as soon as there was a world beyond Europe. In the olden days, you talked about Christendom or the empire or the known world. Europe only became a word after, for Europeans, Asia and Africa and the Americas, and at some point even Australia, became a reality and you had to deal with it. In a cultural world where everybody considers herself and himself somehow in the middle, where you say, okay, somebody has a nice house, is maybe richer than I am, and some persons need help with money for the studies. They don't have so much money, but we're all somehow in the middle. And I think middle class is a word used very, very, very much in every newspaper describing humanity or relevant humanity as a whole. And if now a talk like this is possible again, maybe after the early 80s, again, when we talk about class, when in Great Britain we have the World Transformed Festival, when in Germany there are class-based actions where we try to disown corporate landlords based on an analysis of class, or where even the Erasmus program now goes beyond the word social inclusion, but addresses at least the communities of the have-nots, even if they avoid the word class. So from an analytical perspective, class as a personal relation to the rest of the world and other people is a Marxist analysis, and you don't have to be a Marxist in this world, but maybe it helps. While social stratification in this world is, of course, an empirical reality. Every economist, every sociologist measures exclusion, inclusion based on your financial capital, your cultural capital, deriving largely but not absolutely from your financial capital, and so on. So to answer your question, you have not talked about class yet, and people have not talked to you about class yet, because people from the working class, the actual working class, are not very present in your world.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's sometimes very valuable to also have an external look at our privileges, which we might not find as privileges, but as norm. Maybe that's a little bit the question why we don't notice what is out there, maybe for some other people very noticeable. I noticed that some of you wanted to unmute your microphones and just go ahead and ask more questions to Falko. I invite us to a kind of open discussion. Yeah, we will not go to groups today, and maybe it's also a good thing we talk on our behalf, not on behalf of groups. So just raise a hand using the reactions or your video, and bring on your questions, maybe your thoughts, ideas, insights after this presentation. I think it's not only Falko to answer questions, but maybe also you have some insights that you would like to share with Falko and with all of us. Yes, please, Teddy.
Falko, I still am very active in the trade union. I've spent 30 years being a branch secretary. I'll explain that to people. We're also a convener for a union which represented about 3,000 people. One of the things that is that is very lacking in education is about trade unions. It's one of the biggest things that I think most trade unions want to be like me, grade, stay and don't move forward. To young people in schools particularly, I think I come from a very working class background with no qualifications or anything. And I know what it was like to now, to move in a world where I got a degree and then got another one. And I'm now doing some work at the local university. But I think it's important, Falko, not to lose your roots. Not to lose your roots. And probably for people here, they'll think I've got a very strong accent. And that is another thing in the UK. I don't think people realise we're class-ridden in the UK. That's why we left Europe. Because I think they were frightened of Europeans talking to one another. But every European country doesn't work that well together. And I've done a lot of exchanges with young people. I think it's really important that you look at any person, as a human being, because you don't create solidarity from saying, where do you live? Where do you come from? And I think that is one thing that that's why I'm still doing youth work, because I just love working with young people. So I think you've made a lot of good points, and it's really interesting to see the trade unions talking here. I think Anna and Maria have done a good job here to actually listen to somebody who represents people. So do you think trade unions have a role to play though in youth work?
A little disclaimer, I'm a union secretary for the
Yeah.
industrial union IG Metall. So the most obvious answer I can give, yes, unions are very important and they should be even more important. But even beyond that, I think that the trade union as a place where people in a company come together beyond their role in the company, start communicating, start maybe even electing a spokesperson, is a original moment of education, self-organization, and actualization of their role in the world. That I'm not only a wife, a girlfriend, a father, whatever, and a worker, and I only have the roles, but that I can define my own roles by coming together with people. And the trade union, as a very, very old instrument with certain rights in the workplace, that you can't be harmed by your employer if and when and how you organize. I think trade unions are interesting and important framework for all kinds of people, from universities, where they are workers as well sometimes, and to the construction sites where my father learned when he was 13 to how to be a builder. Education about trade unions and that they exist and that you can go and find out about them is a part of the education in German vocational schools. It's like one line in the curriculum. But as more and more people go on to University of Applied Sciences or universities or colleges, or maybe as IT experts don't even go to formal education, just get the right certificates for the programming languages they need. More and more parts of the functional working class are ripped off the old right to know about themselves and about their original organization, the trade union. So I agree with you, Terry, wholeheartedly, that the trade union not only should visit the shop floors or the construction sites or people at their workplace, but that we should meet people in secondary school. That when with 15 and 16 years old, when you start to engage with Fridays for Future or Black Lives Matter, or with your parents because they don't give you enough money for your computer games, that at this point, this reality of trade union has to be visible. Of course, I can be a libertarian and I can reject the idea of trade union and of working class altogether. But I can only formulate my own position to that if I know about that. And that's one of the big political goals of mine, that we learn how to go to the secondary schools, whether it's a comprehensive school or a lyceum or whatever, and learn from the young people of this generation what kind of trade unionism do they need, what kind of people come together and as a group become something else than people getting orders and operating based on orders from a boss. How does this function of becoming a political person, how does this work in a world of Zoom and intercultural diversity and people having through the 8-hour workday or less hour workday more than one identity as a worker? And I may be queer as well, and I'm maybe German as well, and I'm a RPG Dungeons and Dragons lover as well, and how all these identities allow me still to identify as a worker, even if worker became a slur in the neoliberal 30 years we have now behind us.
Thank you very much, Falko.
And my answers have to become shorter.
No, that's interesting because I guess your answers are invoking or inspiring more questions. So why not? We have Miriam Petra waiting to ask her question or give her insight, please.
Hi, thank you. Sorry, I'm just going to move. It's very confusing to look at a different screen here. Hi, thank you for the presentation. And I just wanted to ask, just kind of for simple advice, maybe it's not simple, but I live in a country, so I'm in Iceland, and this is a country where people are, we tend to believe that we are all equal and there are no classes in Iceland, where there definitely are. And so it's a topic that's just very hard to bring up because people just really strongly often believe that there is no class, differences here. I'm just wondering if you have any advice on how to yeah, that's a tough question probably, but if you have any experience of talking about it with people that really believe that there is no class system in place or class differences.
Yeah, my experience is not Icelandic, but Finnish, where I heard sentences like, well, there is a bourgeoisie, there is a ruling class, but it's in fucking Sweden and not here. Maybe in Iceland that this would be Denmark. But that Iceland has a independent bourgeoisie and the financial elite was made very, very clear in the financial crisis of 2009, 2010. Of course, from a very, very Scandinavian, egalitarian, maybe even cultural socialist point of view, these were just corrupt people who gained their elite status by moral disqualification and not being on a emotional, moral level with the rest of the people. And here, maybe it would be difficult to talk about, yeah, this guy owns a shop, he's an employer, while somebody owning a shop can have at least less money than somebody working in a factory. Here, from an Icelandic perspective, maybe it's easier, which would be even the next step for larger countries or huge countries, to talk about the international dependency of the classes among themselves, that an Icelandic banker is part of an international bourgeoisie, has an international interest, and if necessary, he will bomb the geysers if it helps some talk at the New York Stock Exchange or in a meeting in Beijing. He will or she will sell the country in order to make the complete country into ice hotels and a recreational park for people who can afford it. So maybe in Iceland, in this specific economy, I would just get out the brochures of tourism in Iceland and ask what kind of person can afford that? What kind of Icelander can go to the kind of Icelandic hotels and bars and vodka tasting parties which are advertised to the traveling upper middle classes and to the upper classes outside of Iceland and outside the Scandinavian Nordic context. But
no, thank you. It's a very good way to put it. I'm very happy with that answer and it's very useful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We had Alexia raising her hand. She would like to take floor.
Yes. Hello, Falko. Find everything that you said very interesting because I come from Greece, and after more than 10 years of financial crisis, we, I would say, no longer have a middle class, or the middle class, let's call it, is beginning to disappear. My question is on the three examples that you mentioned about workers who, through these specific examples that you referred to, managed to travel abroad and work abroad. What is the feedback that you got from them? What is it that they earned from this experience, and how did it help them on a local level? What did they gain out of this eventually?
When I can talk about the example of SPBMD based in Kavadarci, not so far away from the current Greek border, what I gathered from the guys was that their local work gained a bit more attractiveness. Okay, maybe it's not so much fun of hanging out in the youth center and sometimes doing some work for the city and repairing something, but once a year, 10 or 15 of us can go to Prague or can go to Pisa in Italy, and we meet other people, and maybe even the level for the younger people there. So we can meet boys and girls in their part of identity as boys and girls. And at the same time, they have a impact on the other people they meet there. More people coming from office worker families when they're there, and there has to be a renovation done together with refugees. They actually know how to build a fence. They actually know how to work together in stressful situations. Somebody with a doctorate in sociology is used to, as a reaction to stress, to go back into my room, watch Netflix, and then write my paper why the world is evil and patriarchal and capitalistic, which is a useful skill. But these guys, these SPVMD people, had the skill of going through a stressful experience, through a conflict, by saying, okay, let's work together on this. Let's clean the dishes together, or just repair the fence together. And through this activity of sweating together and doing something concrete together, they had a lot of conflict resolution skills, very, very useful to the rest of the group and the perceived culture and atmosphere in the group.
Yeah, thank you very much. Maria from Salto Inclusion and Diversity has raised her hand. Please, Maria, you have the floor. And everybody else, just be active. You can also post your questions in the chat if you don't want to take the floor speaking.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Falko. I'm not sure if this is a question, maybe just more a comment that really made me think. I had like an aha moment when you said that something about, I don't know how you formulated it, like leaving people in their own reality while taking them to a different one. Because I think we always stand and creating a safe space for them in that way. But I think we always tend to, you know, like, I don't know how to say, to really show people what, you know, like all those maybe new things that they, you know, like once they're out of their own reality, have a chance to discover, and which can be really scary actually. But we think, oh, we should take people out of the comfort zone because, yeah, that's where the, I don't know how this is.
That's where the magic begins.
Where the magic happens. But I'm just curious how then they step out of their own reality to this new one, or how that, you know, where then the magic happens when you leave them in their own reality in a new one. I don't know. I'm not. I don't know how to formulate this, Falko, but I don't know if you understand what I'm what I'm trying to ask you.
If you go to a group of young workers and tell them, come to an exchange meeting for trust building and intercultural cooperation and communication on verbal and non-verbal multimodal communication, they will say, yeah, thanks, please go away, I'm eating my kebab. If you tell them, well, there's a work camp, there are people coming from other places, and they have different tools, they have different experience how to do the work you do, and they maybe can show you a trick how to work without breaking your back before you're 27. And yes, 27 is often the breaking point for people on construction sites, where they lose their ability to move their back, and then they have to go back to unskilled labor. This is an immediate concern for them. And then you can tell them, Finnish crazy forest people know how to work for their whole life, so they can show you something. Come with us, let's meet the crazy Finnish forest people, and see what happens. So if I accept their reality and they do their reality, like as part of their further education of working with wood or working with bricks, or whatever their work reality is, they come to a new place, and this is already outside the comfort zone. And if some German workers youth meet crazy Finns and learn from them how to make your own alcohol, already magic happens. So everything we do with this soft skill development and the realization of skills for intercultural communication, we don't advertise that so much if we meet young groups, or like we do programs with 12, 14-year-olds, but we already know that this will happen. So it's not we don't do treason against our pedagogical values. If we tell workers, let's meet for an international work camp where we exchange the ways we work so that we can live longer and better and don't break our backs.
Thank you. Just a quick reaction. I'm now even wondering if it's only about how we communicate the things, or we are just not really creating, like activities which are really based on the needs of certain groups, but it's just more based on our needs or on what we know as a youth workers or what we find really important, and we want kind of others to.
Yeah, but I think it's not so far. Even if you're a highly educated, sophisticated youth and social worker living on some level of non-formal educational bliss, you still know that the venue where you work needs repairs. You still know that there is a distance between the train stop and the training center. And maybe you have people in a wheelchair which cannot go this distance through the forest to the training center. And you have immediate areas where work is needed, or where people could come together and exchange about how to make the venue better, how to make the path to the venue better, or how to create posters and dissemination materials not ordered from some boring printer, but maybe made by yourself, depending on what kind of people you work with. So if you get an idea how to make the path to your venue more wheelchair accessible, and you find a teacher or social worker working with people in the so-called green jobs or in the construction area, why not call them and ask them, could it be fun to have 4 of these guys come and show you how to repair a road or a gravel path, and then you work together with these young people, and from the exchange and in the breaks talking together, you get new ideas of how to do your pedagogical magic with these people.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Falko. I think we can take maybe 2 more questions, and the first one to raise hand is Peter Jan. Please, I hope I pronounced your name correctly.
Yeah, you can say PG as well if you want to. Thanks, Falko. I have actually 2 combined questions. The first is maybe more on the theoretical level, where your approach on class in the presentation was making me feel like that class is like one homogeneous group, the working class. And I was wondering what your take is on that, and on bringing back or bringing in a view of diversity in class. So that's the first part. But the second part is maybe yeah, more interesting. When you were talking about the projects you had, I think this was mostly on the collectivized form of work that you said in the presentation, but then you also have like the standardized where we are in right now. And in the presentation, you mentioned that the standardized is more individual, like platform economy, etc. So I was wondering how you can, yeah, if on maybe on the one hand, in the projects that you had, if you had both the collectivized forms of, well, collectivized companies or people working in these collectivized companies, and also in the standardized, how do you approach that? I hope this is a clear question.
When you talk about the working class as an homogeneous group, that depends on what kind of society we're talking about and how absolute the exclusion of the working class is from the means of reproduction. To the degree to which the working class has access to financial, cultural resources, I don't say capital in this context, then the things laid down in a person's character and the chances of that unique character is developing increases as well. If you think about the images from 150 years ago from Manchester capitalism or from the coal mines where well, you work or you die. And if still my grandmother knew of neighbors where the daughter with some impairments physically and mentally was just locked into the garden shed for the 14 years of her life until she died, where any form of diversity is excluded by the sheer necessity of I fulfill my function or I die. In the moment when our society gets richer and the working class develops more political rights, and they develop political rights on an individual basis as citizens, which is a fairly recent thing, as only 130 years ago in Germany, you could, in my country, you could only vote if you owned property, meaning owning land. With that, develops the ability to live diversity. So the more power the working class has, the more it realizes its collective structure, the more breathing space the class members become to be as queer as they want to, as colorful as they want to, know as many languages as they want to, and so on. About the standardized and the collectivized, I'm not so sure whether the standardized reality of the media society today is less collectivized than the old collective form of you sleep in the workers' village, you work at the factory, and then you go for soccer in between. Back then, in the good old days, my country, Germany, had 3 television channels. And our neighbors in Austria had 2, and the Czech guys had 5. Now we all have Netflix. We have all one design of how our TV series works, how culture works, how reality and how truth is being produced from Hanoi to San Francisco. So in this standardized realm where a delivery service worker doesn't have to care whether he works in Moscow or in St. Petersburg, because they have the same Google Maps, they have the same clothes, they have the same food they deliver. So I'm not sure whether the standardized world, which is a rather Foucaultian world of internalized collective identity is so much freer or more individual than what we perceive as the 1950 small world of the single worker. And working with the guys, of course, I know experiments with just say Netflix is great, but Netflix alone is boring. So in the youth center, there's a Netflix evening where people talk together what they want to watch, and they watch it together. They talk about what they watch, which would be a very, very low barrier area where people get nearer to the idea of you can talk to other people and you can create something new together with other people, even if it's only watching a stupid Netflix show. But I think we're in the beginning of working on that level, while of course in the political realm, protest, an example of delivery workers or of car workers is much more easier because the life reality of a guy in Germany and in Turkey and in Great Britain is more and more similar. So international solidarity becomes more easier to understand because we all lead the same lives independent of cultural or geographic context.
Thank you very much, Falko. We're slowly starting to close our ID talks today. Quite interesting to see all the faces also behind the screen. I think it's a lot of thinking that we need to do after this ID talks. Maria, maybe we have some comments in the chat that you would like to bring to our attention.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Falko, for the amazing presentation. We just got some comments about a nice presentation you gave us, and also about keeping up your passion. Unfortunately, some of our colleagues and participants had to leave a little bit earlier after your presentation, but they made sure to tell me that it was great and they really enjoyed today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. And this is also the moment by which most of us might have forgotten about Olaja working there in the background. So let's first time ever being live broadcasted, see what's out there, what you managed to capture, Olaja. I know today was quite a lot of concepts and theory, and yeah, let's see how it reflected in your graphics.
Thank you very much. I will start sharing the first draft that we got from the talk today. Let me know with a thumbs up if you can see it already.
Yeah.
All right, super. So again, this is just a very brief snapshot of some of the content that Falko has shared with us today. Very interesting, all these intrinsic connections that, that we have all around the concept of class and what it is talked about and is not talked about, and then how many levels there are at governmental level, also when it comes to our own work as educators and social workers perhaps. So how do we get to this concept and how can we work with it and have an impact on it when we have our activities with young people. So again, this will be remade based on the inputs, on the recording, and of course on the slides as well. And then it will be shared with all of you in a few days. So thank you so much, Falko.
Thank you very much, Olaja. Very, very impressive. So and just before we slowly adjourn, I would like to pass you the floor again, Falko, if you would like to say some final words, maybe some key messages that you would like us and our audience to leave this ID Talks today.
I can try. I want to say thank you for our larger group of over a dozen people being engaged in this topic enough to be here now for way over an hour. That's quite something. I was impressed by your questions and how deep you are already in thinking about how to deal with class, thinking about homogeneity and how restrictive a word like class could be, or how real it could be. So that gives me a bit of hope that it's useful that we continue the talk about class and how we can make the concept of class useful for our concepts. And what I wanted to stress is the iterative thinking. Even if you reject the word class and you need another word, or you do not believe in my thesis, which you do not have to, I'm not a professor, but that we keep on an iterative way of experimental working. That for the first activity where we call a social worker or a union worker representative of Continental or whatever, and invite him to an activity or to develop together an activity with her, that we do not try to have the whole concept, but that as these are workers, you can work with them to develop the kind of youth work which can be useful at some point together.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody, for staying till the very end with us. And thank you very much to all the audience, first time watching this question and answer session on Facebook Live. We're very privileged to be sharing this experience with you. And we hope to see you back joining us at the next ID Talks, exactly 2 weeks from now, Wednesday, same place, same time. Thank you very much and goodbye.